Yeah, so we're looking at the velocity data. Remember, this is what we used a lot of times to determine where rotation is occurring in these thunderstorms. You know, if we have a tornado warning, a lot of times we'll show this to show you where that most likely tornado is occurring. What is, zoom out just a little bit for me, Jason. So what is happening, zoom out a little bit more too. What is happening here is the greens is where the radar, where the wind is moving away from the radar. The red is where the wind is moving toward the radar, and if you can imagine kind of where those greens and reds come together, that's where you're going to have a rotation because the wind is kind of counteracting each other, and that's what causes the rotation. But we can also see where there's just very strong winds within that storm as well, where those brighter colors are, such as down by off to the east-southeast of Waxahachie. You see how those brighter colors are right there, or I should say west-southwest of Waxahachie. That's where the strongest of those winds are at the moment. They could be anywhere in that 70 to 80 miles an hour. Jason, if you turn off the warnings and then you can query it, and we can exactly see what those winds are. So yeah, they're going to be 70 to 80 miles an hour right there, and that's kind of where the strongest, where the radar at least is picking up the strongest winds. There you go. That's exactly what we were talking about. So what we call that gate-to-gate shear, that's where the winds are blowing right next to each other. That's how you get that spinning action within a thunderstorm. That's how those tornadoes form. Earlier when we had that tornado warning over parts of Dallas County, and we had that tornado warning in parts of Fannin County too, those winds kind of spinning next to each other. You get the spin up of a tornado. That's what we call that gate-to-gate shear. That's on the low side. But just the winds themselves are obviously very strong, and that's where we're getting those 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, what we call those straight line winds. So the velocity being picked up there, at least according to the radar, is 60 miles an hour. Of course, we've seen reports 70 plus, even up to 80 miles an hour. So the radar, not perfect by any means. That's why those ground reports are absolutely vital for us to know what's going on. But the radar, at least, picking up those 60 miles an hour winds at the moment, the strongest of them, at least according to the radar, anywhere from Italy all the way up to Waxahachie. But anywhere within along kind of that leading edge of those storms is where you could get those wind gusts easily up to 70 miles an hour, as we've seen at times throughout this evening and into tonight, and that's why we have all those warnings in place. But at least right there, that's where those strongest winds are. And you can see the bright colors even extending back into DFW. I mean, it's not like once the storms have blown through that the winds just calm down. No, I mean, we're still seeing gusts of 40 to 50 miles an hour on the backside of this storm. There you go. Wind speeds, the velocity according to the radar, almost 50 miles an hour over northern Tarrant County. Where the worst of the storms have ended, it's still raining in portions of the area, but where the worst of the storms have ended, that's just that wind on the backside of the system, this powerful storm system that first, as Pete's been talking about, first moved through California, then Arizona, now moving into North Texas. It's why the wind, the temperatures drop 20, 25 degrees after the storms have blown through. We've gone from the 70s down into the 50s. There's the velocity picking up maybe 54 miles an hour. Now, some of this is being recorded a little bit off of the surface of the ground where the radar beam is intersecting some of the raindrops and particles above the earth where we get this information from. But, I mean, it's showing you that those strong winds are still in place on the backside of this system, and that's why we also have a wind advisory in place through tomorrow morning just because of the strong winds. And just now, a 66 mile an hour wind gust was recorded in Terrell. So there you go. I mean, that's proof that the radar absolutely, doing what it's supposed to and showing us that those strong wind gusts are, on the leading edge of that. So just go back to the normal radar for me there, Jason. There you go. So a reminder, we still have severe thunderstorm warnings for Hunt County, Rockwall County, Kaufman County, down into Ellis County, now for Navarre County and extending over into Henderson County as well. There's the rains just falling in Fort Worth at the moment, but still rather gusty. And we do have that tornado warning up in Fannin County that's where we've talked about where we did pick up on the radar a little bit of that tighter rotation. And that's what prompted the tornado warning. That was the rotation itself was kind of just outside of the Bonham area. Now it's kind of moving into eastern Fannin County and will eventually move into Lamar County as well, though the intensity of that storm looks like it may have dropped just a little bit. That's good news, but the warning's still in place. Still have to absolutely take it seriously because even though the intensity that's just talking about kind of the rainfall and maybe a little bit of hail in there, the wind speeds in that and the potential for a tornado still absolutely exists with that storm as it moves basically right up through Honey Grove and then eventually into western Lamar County, almost right along Highway 82 there as it runs between Fannin and Lamar County as well. So, Jason, you go back down to the south. Reminder, we just had that gust of up to 70 miles an hour, 66 miles an hour in Terrell. And you are seeing that maybe the wind speeds have diminished slightly. I mean, maybe not the 70 to 80 mile an hour winds that we were seeing earlier as the storms were moving through the, immediate DFW area, but we're still seeing gusts of 60 plus. We could still see gusts up to 70 plus. That's still strong enough to do damage. And as we've talked about earlier, the threshold for an EF0 tornado, that's as weak as a tornado gets, but it's still a tornado, is anywhere from 65 to 85 miles an hour. So a wind gust of 66 miles an hour, a wind gust up to 70 miles an hour, that's as strong as a low-end tornado. And as we've seen with all the damage videos and pictures that you've been sending in, the damage, unfortunately, a little bit more widespread than a tornado would be because it kind of tracks into a smaller area than, when you're talking about a line of storms, and the entire line of storms is having 60, 70, 80 mile an hour winds. Of course, that's going to do a lot more damage than just an isolated tornado is going to do. And unfortunately, it can cause a lot more power outages, as we've seen as well. And unfortunately, can cause issues on the roadways with flipping over semi 18-wheelers and things like that. So, Jason, I don't think we've done a track here in a little bit or in a while. So why don't we pause that and do a track maybe kind of from Greenville all the way down to the southern end of that line as it moves through Hunt County into Kaufman County, and eventually over into Van Zandt County. So Van Zandt County, Rains County, not under the warning just yet, but of course you will be as the storms move a little closer to you. So here's the timing for those storms. It's 7:25, almost 7:26 right now. Storms will be moving into Lone Oak at about 7:40. Kaufman, they're basically right on your doorstep. So Kaufman, stay indoors, stay away from the windows. You got 60 to 70 mile an hour winds headed your way. You just had a 66 mile an hour wind gust in Terrell, at the airport in Terrell. So that's what's about to move into Kaufman at the moment. Wills Point, you'll be a little closer to 7:50. Canton, a little after 8 o'clock. Grand Saline, between 8 and 8:15. And then over into East Texas, like Quitman and Mineola, that would be a little bit closer to 8:30, and then eventually over into the Lindale, Pittsburgh area, which is portions of Smith County, and farther to the east. That would be a little before 9 o'clock there. So you can take off that warning now, Jason. Let's go back to just kind of. All right, just saw it. We had a tornado warning issue, but it's down for portions of central Texas and not in our viewing area. The only tornado warning we have is the one up in Fannin County for that storm moving from Fannin County to Lamar County. So if you're in the DFW area at the moment, the majority of the DFW area, we'll say anywhere from Dallas to McKinney to Denton to Louisville, out by the big airport, Arlington, Fort Worth, Saginaw, the worst of the storms are definitely over, but it is still very gusty in your areas. We still have wind gusts, 40 to 50 miles an hour on the backside of all this. Obviously, it is still raining, but your severe weather threat has ended for the evening. It's still very gusty, still rainy, but the severe concern has definitely shifted to the east right along that leading edge of those lines of storms. So some of you I know, unfortunately, could be without power. There's still some additional lightning strikes, so I wouldn't just say immediately leave the house, especially as we've been dealing with, power lines down, and you got to be careful if you're driving out and about. Don't drive over down power lines or anything like that. So if you don't have to be out and about this evening, it's just not a good idea to be so, even if you're on the backside of all this. And if you have to be, use extreme caution, especially if you run across any down power lines. Don't drive over them. Be aware of any trees down that could be causing issues as well. And I just did see a report of a 74 mile an hour wind gust on the west side of Terrell, and that would make sense too, right as those storms are arriving. So we had said that they, may be trying to weaken just a little bit in terms of those wind gusts, and then all of a sudden we get a 74 mile an hour wind gust. So maybe those winds of 70 plus aren't as widespread as earlier, but we're still seeing some reports of that from time to time, and that comes right on the heels of that wind gust of 66 miles an hour in Terrell as well. So it's absolutely something that needs to be taken seriously for those of you in Hunt County, Kaufman County, the eastern portion of Ellis County, Navarre County. You're just now seeing storms, and I know we have a lot of folks that watch us in Henderson County, and yeah, you can still, your storms are due to arrive here in the next hour or so as this line continues to push off to the east.
Yeah, and meteorologist Kyle Roberts, we have meteorologist Jesse Huila here as well. And as I was looking at some other information that we have, what I'm noticing is, and it's not a surprise, but I'm noticing by looking at a lot of these pictures, a lot of these videos, most of the wind damage that I'm seeing is on the west side facing roofs. we had those strong straight line winds blowing from the west to the east, and they're ripping off a lot of these roofs, certainly at a minimum shingles, but they're doing a lot of damage on the west side and then blowing it all off to the east side due to the nature of and the direction of the winds tonight. Still have severe thunderstorm warnings in effect for Ellis and Hill County until 8 o'clock tonight. There's Ellis, there's Hill, here's Navarro. There is Kaufman, Rockwall, and also Hunt County and Fannin County, all under severe thunderstorm warnings right now. Well, if you are just joining us, good evening, everyone. I'm WFAA Chief Meteorologist Pete Delkus. We have been doing continuous weather coverage since about 5:35 tonight due to a strong, severe line of storms that is moving through the area. We're all under a tornado watch until 10 o'clock tonight. In addition to that, we have had numerous severe thunderstorm warnings tonight. We have had winds confirmed of 70 to 80 plus miles per hour. And right now, just on the east side of the Metroplex, we're looking at a severe line of storms that extends from the Red River. I tracked this and measured this just 30 minutes or so ago on the air. It's about a 300-mile long squall line that extends, and that doesn't include the distance up in Oklahoma, but in Texas it includes from the Red River all the way down to very near San Antonio. So as the crow flies, it's almost 300 miles long, and that line of storms all in advance of it right now, as Kyle just mentioned. We're looking at winds of around, in the Metroplex we had winds of 80 to 83. On the east side of the Metroplex right now, these locations that are under these warnings, these are winds of 70 to 75 miles per hour. So they're just as bad. They'll create just as much damage as what we've seen. And Chris and Cynthia are here with us as well. I know you've been keeping an eye on things. Once this storm arrives in your location from Greenville to Terrell to Palmer, Corsicana, Canton, Athens, hasn't hit you yet. When it does, you're going to have about 15 to 30 minutes of really, really intense winds. Then the winds are going to go from 70 down to 60 for another 15 minutes or so. And finally, about 45 minutes later, they'll drop to around 40 or 50 miles per hour. So strong winds in place right now across the area.